Good morning, students. My name is J Motitswe. I'm the lecturer, the primary lecturer for the module Inclusive Education in the Foundation phase. The module code is IFP3701. Let me first start to explain the purpose of the module, which is to equip students with the knowledge and understanding on how to address barriers to how to identify and address barriers to learning and development from a holistic perspective in the foundation phase. The other one is to have a clear understanding on how to provide the necessary support and use different intervention strategies in order to address barriers to learning and development in a diverse multicultural context. And the module further address the importance of adapting and differentiating the curriculum in order to accommodate learners experiencing barriers to learning and development in the foundation phase. Let me first start with with study unit 1, which is about the policies of inclusive education. Students, let me explain that for you to understand inclusive education and to understand why inclusive education is important, how did inclusive education or how was inclusive education developed or established, you first have to understand the policies, the legislations, and also the guidelines. So here we are having the international and human rights policies. Under these policies, we have got the international policies as well as the South African policies. I'm not going to go deeper into those policies because today's presentation is more about preparing you for examinations. And the other aspects that will help us to implement inclusive education effectively is the theories on inclusive teaching and learning. The theories, remember, they are a lens at how we want to see things happen. So these theories will guide us to come up with strategies, different strategies, or differentiate our curriculum, our methods, our resources, so that we can be able to provide support. We can be able to address diverse barriers to learning. And then let us also understand what diverse learning needs are and the factors that are causing the barriers to learning. So I'm going to go straight into the policies. What I have presented was the module content. Now let us come to the objective of inclusive education in the foundation phase. The objective of any education system is one of providing quality education for all learners, regardless of their educational level. Remember what quality education means. And we're also looking at all learners, not specific learners or not learners who are bright in a classroom, but we're talking about all learners. When we are able to provide support, when we are able to, when we are able to identify barriers to learning at an early stage, and we provide the relevant support to those learners, all learners, then we know that we are providing quality education. And all learners deserve nothing less than quality education and training that would provide them with opportunities for lifelong learning, the world of work, and meaningful participation in society as productive citizens. As I mentioned when I was explaining the content that we'll be discussing today, I indicated that for you to have a better understanding of what inclusive education is, why inclusive education was established, you first have to understand the policies that influenced this process, or this process. Inclusive education is defined as a process of providing and responding to diverse needs of learners through increasing participation in learning cultures, communities, by reducing exclusion, colleagues, students, I believe that you heard what I said. Inclusive education is defined as a process of providing and responding to diverse needs of all learners. I didn't mention specific learners and I didn't segregate, but I say providing and responding to diverse needs of all learners. You must remember that every individual is different. Every individual is unique. We therefore have our own needs. Global phenomenon. Every country has adapted an inclusive education policies based on different contexts. Therefore, whether you are in South Africa, in Namibia, in Europe, in Canada, in Zimbabwe, any country that you are in, there is an inclusive education policy, and you cannot use South African inclusive education policy whereas you are in Namibia or whereas you are in Botswana. You have to first look at the context where you are so that you can be able to implement that. We have got the education building and inclusive education and training system, which was developed in 2001. The policy stipulates that all schools, and I say all schools and educational institutions, have to accept inclusion as part of their approach to teaching and learning. Inclusion focuses on transformation of education system and schools so that they can respond to diversity of learners' needs resulting from their social and cultural background in their individual characteristics. The policies that are heavy, that influenced the inclusive education movement or the inclusive education is, let me say inclusive education originates from the human rights pronounced by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every person has got his or has got a right to basic education. So that is what we are talking about, the human rights. There are specific rights that order should access. Therefore, education is one of those basic rights that every human being should access. Everyone has the right to education, and education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary, meaning that we are talking at from the ECD until the senior and FET phase. Education shall be directed to the full development of human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and personal freedom. I'm not going to go deeper into the policies, but I'm just going to mention them. I know that you had one assignment where you had to analyze some of the policies so that you can be able to explain how. So here I'm talking about the universal human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. How did it influence inclusive education? In education, firstly, is a right, it's a basic right. Primary schools should be free. The emphasis should be to avoid discrimination. And the emphasis is, okay, let me say the emphasis is about discrimination, to avoid discrimination. Therefore, everybody should have, the equality should be. The other one is the World Education Forum, which was developed which was held at a Johnson Conference, Education for All. And then how did it influence inclusive education? The major milestones of the international dialogue on the place of human rights development. For it makes education a top priority. The other one is the Salamanca Statement and the framework for 92 countries conference. They looked and they also amended the previous policies. It calls for major school reform. It recognizes the needs for an agency of providing education for all children, young people, and adults within the education system. That means every child has the fundamental right to education, and that every child, all children are unique. Therefore, education must be considered, must consider their diverse needs. And in South Africa now, let's come in South Africa. There are 3 policies that we have to look at. Firstly, we're looking at the South African Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It legislates that all people are equal and thus have equal rights, including the fundamental right of basic education. And it prohibits unfair discrimination against everyone on one or more grounds, including race. There should not be discrimination because of race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnicity, social ongoing or sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, beliefs, language, and birth. The South African Schools Act is also one of the policies that still influences and that still supports the inclusive education movement. It articulates the roles and responsibilities of public schools. And it indicates that the system of the issue, it also, let me say it articulates the roles and responsibility of public schools. And then the right is also emphasized on the right of equal access to basic and quality education for all learners without discriminating any sort. And remember, this policy is the one that gave right to the parent, that it says parents have got the right to enroll their kids at any neighboring schools. Therefore, those schools should not deny the learners access to attend schools. The third one is the Education White Paper 6 that I have mentioned, special needs education, building an inclusive education and training. It suggests structural and program changes to South African education system so that diverse learners can be included in mainstream schools. Therefore, remember that when a child is experiencing a barrier in a classroom, do not just say, no, this one belongs to a special school. No. Mainstream schools are also inclusive schools. Mainstream schools, teachers at mainstream schools should provide relevant support, continuous and relevant support to learners. Let me give you feedback on assignment 1 because you didn't provide feedback. There was a question which said, refer to the following section on the South African Constitution and the South African Schools Act, as well as the Education White Paper 6. Analyze them and thereafter design the school's inclusive education policy. Remember that in a school, a policy consists of different aspects, or it should include different features. Firstly, you have to provide the background, you have to provide the aim and objective, and you have to provide an introductory, or let me say the executive summary of that policy. And thereafter now, you look at what, because we said firstly, analyze this policy, the Constitution, the South African Schools Act, and the Education White Paper 6. Thereafter, you design or you develop an inclusive education policy for your school. So what should guide you in that was that an inclusive school, to build an inclusive school community. And then the policy should also emphasize non-discriminatory aspects on enrollment. The policy should also explain that no learner should be excluded in teaching and learning due to socio-economic, cultural, ethnical or ethical, ability or disability, illness or whatsoever reason. And your policy should also focus on or should emphasize that every learner has the right to education and every learner should be provided with relevant support. Every learner should be encouraged to participate in teaching and learning and to reach their full full potential. For you as a teacher to be able to involve the learners, to be able to encourage learners to participate, that means you should know your learners so that you can be able to give them differentiated activities so that they can be able to participate. Remember that in the foundation phase, learners are still developing and they at their own pace in different ways. Therefore, you should, and the foundation phase is a phase that is very crucial because that is where we develop the learner holistically. Now we come to the theories of inclusive education. I indicated that we want things to be conducted or how we want things to be done. Therefore, as a teacher who wants to implement inclusive education effectively, you should be guided, but you should have a theory that will guide you. You should have a theory that will make you to be strong in implementing inclusive education. I'm just going to give you 2 examples of theories, but there are many theories that are related or linked to inclusive education. But for now, let's talk only about the 2. We've got the social constructivist theory. This theory indicates that knowledge is not just passively passed or transferred from one person to the another, but it says knowledge is socially constructed, which means that learning is a social process. And I hope that you understand what the word social means. The pedagogic practices used in this approach focus more on teacher-learner, learner-learner interaction. It's not about the teacher only, but it's the teacher-learner interaction and learner-learner interaction, where learners are supposed to work in groups, in pairs, in whole class, as individuals, or collaboratively. This is what constructive theory is about. And then a social constructivist teacher can create a context for learning in which learners can participate in an interest or in interesting activities using their own style of learning. What I like about constructivist theory, it gives teachers many opportunities to provide support to learners. Social constructivist approaches that teachers can use collaboration, scaffolding. When you're talking about scaffolding, let me give you a practical example. You are teaching grade 3 and you see that there is a particular learner who's still at the level of grade 1 learners. Therefore, you are going to take activities of grade 1, but not diverting from the topic or from the theme. You use the same theme, but you scaffold the activities so that that learner can also participate effectively. Because we're talking about encouraging participation and also making sure that the learners achieve to their full potential. And social constructivism also encourages cognitive apprenticeship, tutoring, cooperative learning, learning communities, mentoring, and continuous professional development programs. Let us talk about the second theory, which is the Brenner Ecological Systems Theorem. This theory is about, it aims to show how individual people and groups at to different levels of society are linked, at different society are linked in active interdependence and interacting relationship. This is a theory that shows how support can be done, or how you can identify barriers from different levels, and thereafter, from those different levels, you work together so that you can be able to work, to provide relevant support. That is why we say it is looking at how individuals and groups at different levels of society are linked in active, interdependent, and interacting relationship. Inclusive education specifically focuses specifically on systems approach. That is the system in society, for example, the school, the classroom, family, community, and the government. It needs that to interact so that it can provide support structures for the learner. Remember, we are doing this for the sake of the learner. This theory also emphasizes that you should understand the complex influences, interactions, and interrelationships in terms of the learner and all other systems associated with the learner. For example, a learner does not sit still, or a learner is, you see that this learner is not responding or is not active at school, in the classroom or what. Don't just generalize. Don't just look at the learner because maybe the learner is not neat or what, but look at what is it that have influenced or that might have caused the behavior of what the learner is doing. The behavior that the learner is showing in the classroom. That means you have to discuss with the parents so that you can get the family background. You also have to interact with other teachers. You also have maybe to involve stakeholders within the communities. So in this theory, we've got we've got 5 levels. The first one is the microsystem. It is characterized by individuals and even the classroom, the neighborhood, or the system. The other one is the mesosystem, the interaction of 2 microsystems. Remember, microsystem is the system that is closely linked to the learner. Now, the mesosystem composed of the interaction between 2 microsystems, for example, such as connection between the child's home and the school, between the neighborhood and the home. The mesosystem, all of the microsystems interact together to contribute the development of the child. And the other one is the exosystem, is the environment that does not involve the learner directly, but it affects them anyway. For example, when the work situation of the child's parents requires a lot of traveling, this affects the learner. That is why in most cases, teacher would say parents are not involved. There is lack of involvement in the parents. We don't know what is it that caused that lack of involvement. You might find that the parent is not staying at home. Are we looking? Are we focusing on that, or do we want to know that what is the background, or who does the learner live with at home? So the macrosystem affects the child indirectly. The exosystem, it affects the child indirectly. For example, another example, maybe it's only the father who is working and the father loses his job. That means now the whole life in that family is going to change, and that will also affect the learner. The macrosystem is the larger cultural structure or context, the circumstances, beliefs, customs, and laws shared by the community around the child. The cultural context can include the socio-economic status, poverty, ethnicity, religion, and the others. The last one is the chronosystem. It shows changes over time. For example, family structure, socio-economic status, schooling, and the living conditions. I've got a case study, but I'm not going to go deeper into the case study. As soon as you get the presentation, you will go through the presentation. I mean, you'll go through the case study so that you can be able to answer the question. Now let us come to diverse learning needs. We have got different examples of diverse learning needs. For example, learners who have difficulty in reading and writing. We don't say these learners are stupid, or we don't say these learners, they cannot participate or they cannot perform, or they are not capable, but it is their learning needs. So what is it that you do so that you can provide relevant for those learners who cannot read or write? Learners who have difficulties in mathematics, we don't focus on that specifically, but we focus on relevant strategies, relevant support strategies that we can use to provide support to these learners who experience barriers in or who have got difficulty in mathematics. Learners with different learning style, learners with hearing, visual, or coordination difficulties, learners living in poverty. That's also a diverse need. And then we don't say, no, because the child comes to school hungry and she cannot participate in the morning, so it's not my problem, it's her parents' problem. Don't say that. How do we provide support to that learner? Learners with health and emotional difficulties, learners experiencing difficulties in remembering what has been taught to them. Let us not focus on these barriers, but rather come up with support strategies relevant for that matter, relevant support strategies so that we can be able to respond to these diverse learners' needs. And then factors that cause barriers to learning, negative attitude towards and stereotyping of differences. Most people I know, they've got an attitude, especially in terms of implementing inclusive practices in their classroom. They will come up with many reasons for not wanting to implement that. That's the attitude. And attitude is a very, 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 very important aspect that we should guard against, that we should work towards so that we can be able to have that positive, to buy in to the policy, inclusive education policy, so that we can be able to provide relevant support. The other the other factor that causes barriers to learning, inflexible curriculum. When we're talking about inflexible curriculum, you want to teach without looking at the learning style of the learners. You want to teach a topic without even differentiating the content. You want to teach using the same resources, not even wanting to see that because there is a learner who can learn best when he has orally, or there is a learner who can learn best through play, but you don't want to look at that. That is inflexible curriculum. Inappropriate language or language of learning and teaching. Remember that South Africa is a multicultural country. There are different languages. We've got 11 official languages, plus the other languages that are spoken by people, the immigrant, let me say immigrants. Therefore, language of teaching and learning can also be a factor that causes barriers to learning. Inappropriate communication, inaccessible and unsafe built environment. Maybe you've got learners who are using wheelchairs, or who are having learners who have visual impairment. So is the building safe, or is the infrastructure accessible to those learners? Inappropriate and inadequate support services. I've mentioned a lot of providing relevant support. So when we're talking about support services, as a teacher, I know at schools there are school-based support teams. As school-based support teams, because you are the service provider for the schools. What is it? How do you collaborate with other stakeholders? There are relevant stakeholders within the communities. How are you interacting with them so that you can provide appropriate and adequate support to the school? The non-recognition and non-involvement of parents. how do we make sure that we encourage parents to be involved in teaching and learning? We've got different types of barriers to learning. We've got the systemic barriers, looking at the overcrowded classrooms, the inaccessible building for students with disabilities, lack of basic and appropriate learning materials, exclusionary policies and practices. These are systemic barriers. We have got societal barriers. These include poverty, safety and security, children affected and infected by HIV and AIDS, child-headed household, children living in streets, students in conflict with the law. These are the societal barriers. We've got institute factors. For example, inflexible curriculum, inappropriate teaching methods, learning and teaching support materials, unqualified and underqualified teachers, inappropriate assessment procedure, lack of support for educators. Because remember, teachers also need support so that they can be able to provide support to learners. Intrinsic barriers, we're talking about learners with neurological, physical, sensory, cognitive disabilities, or learners who have got psychosocial and emotional difficulties. I mentioned that as a foundation-based teacher, it is very important to know your learner. And when you say knowing your learner, what is it that you have to do so that you can be able to know your learners? Remember, no two learners are alike. They each have different attributes, different ways of knowing and of expressing knowledge. Learners are also different and have their own unique learning needs, abilities, interests, and background of experiences. It is crucial for teachers to know their learners very well, particularly how each learner learns most effectively. Knowing your learners is also fundamental so that you can be able to differentiate your curriculum, to differentiate your teaching strategy, your methods, your classroom, so that you can respond to diverse learning needs and also address or reduce barriers to learning. The role of the teacher in identifying the barriers to learning: be committed to the principles of inclusion and take care not to label learners who are identified for additional support. I usually hear teachers, when we go for teaching practice, when we go for community engagement teachers, engagement projects, we'll hear a teacher maybe just labeling, this is an inclusive learner. Why do you say this is an inclusive learner? What? Do you know what inclusive is? For the first thing that you have to ask yourself, what is inclusive when you label that child as an inclusive learner? So let us guard against labeling learners. Know your learners and understand their diverse needs. Understand the learning context. That means the school, the classroom, the home environment, and the full range of potential barriers. For example, is it what we have identified, or why we have identified? Is it intrinsic? Is it societal? Is it systemic? Or meet and interview parents or caregivers and develop working relationship with them. Do not make parents feel very inferior or feel very, feel very inferior, but just make friends to them so that they can be free, so that they can open up and tell you more or give you more background on the learner, so that both of you and the parent can come up with strategies of supporting the learner. Know the curriculum and be able to make it accessible to all learners by accommodating the diverse learning needs and open a learner profile in the foundation phase is very important, not only in grade R, not only in grade 1, but throughout the foundation phase. Make sure that every learner has got his or her own profile. Now let's come to, because in the foundation phase, we know that we have got 3 learning areas or 3 subjects. We have got language, we have got mathematics, and we've got life skills. But now, if we can be able to address barriers to learning in mathematics and also in language, then the learner will be able to participate and achieve in other school subjects. Remember, mathematics and languages are the core subjects that will help the learners to, that will reduce barriers to other school subjects. We know that I've indicated that mathematics is an important part of the modern life. Therefore, what we have to know is that we should know what are the skills that CAPS requires for learners. Those skills include develop the correct use of the language of mathematics. The correct use of the language of mathematics. The develop number vocabulary, number concepts and calculations and applications. Learn to listen, to communicate. Communicate is not only a one-way, but a two-way. Remember we said social constructivists, they are more focused on teacher-learner interaction and learner-learner interaction. Therefore, listen, learn to listen, communicate, think, reason logically, and apply the mathematical knowledge gained. Learn to, these are the skills that we have to make sure that we develop the learners on. Learn to investigate, analyze, represent, and interpret information. Learn to pose and solve problems. These are, and I repeat again, these are the skills that we have to develop. The learners need to develop. Strategies of identifying learners who experience barriers to learning. We have got different strategies on how to identify. The observation is the core strategy, because remember that you observe the learner in the morning, during teaching and learning, at break time when they are playing outside, before going to school. That's how you observe the learner. Carefully observe learners during teaching and learning, break, during extracurricular activities, while that will assist you to identify barriers to learning. And then in observation, we have got 4 types of observation. We have got the formal observation. Within the formal learning, formal observation is done within the formal learning environment. For example, observing in the classroom while the learners are working. And then we have got the informal observation, where you can do that outside of the formal learning environment. For example, observing learners while they are talking, while they are playing with their friends during break, or during extramural activities. The planned activity, observation, can be done when you plan to observe in advance, so that you know who, what, how, and where you will be observing. The unplanned, you notice something. For example, during a story, a story record on an interest incident, and then maybe you teach a story, or you are telling learners a story, and then that's where now you can be able to observe. Teachers must keep their eyes open at all times and notice that. So these types of observation does not mean that, no, today I'm going to do formal observation, but it happens. Let me say it happens. Strategies to, okay, I've talked about observation. So when you observe, make sure that you also have an observation book and a screening checklist. The other strategy, to gather information on learners' background. How do we gather information? By inviting parents for a meeting, by maybe communicating with teachers who were teaching those learners in the previous years, looking at the learner's profile, that's gathering information. Let me not go deeper into the observable factors that could point to intrinsic barriers to learning, because I just want to rush to the examination. Let me say exam preparation. Now let me dwell deeper into the support and intervention strategies. We're talking about curriculum differentiation. It's described as the key strategy for responding to the needs of learners with diverse learning styles and needs. And the curriculum differentiation involves processes of modifying, changing, adapting, extending, and varying teaching methodologies, teaching strategies, assessment strategies, and the content of the curriculum. It takes into account the learner's ability level, the interest, and the background. I hope that you have understood that. It's a process of modifying, changing, adapting, extending, and varying the teaching methodologies, teaching strategies, assessment strategies, and the content, as well as the environment. It takes into account the learner's ability level and the interests of and the background. Curriculum differentiation aims to promote a repertoire of teaching and learning strategies from the standardized to the differentiated, and a range of support for all learners, from learning environment to resources, from peer learning, group learning, including peer learning, group learning, self-directed learning, and also to assessment. And then when we differentiate the curriculum, let's look at differentiating the teaching methods. We have got multi-level teaching. When we talk about multi-level teaching, we're looking at splitting the classroom or the class, splitting the class. Maybe, split learners can be split based on the content level. For example, when a teacher wants to give different inputs to the group. Differentiating the tasks or activities. All learners are given the same basic task, but at different levels according to the ability. That is why I say you don't deviate from the theme. You use the same theme, but you differentiate the activities, abilities or skills. Activities that incorporate other abilities such as mathematics, problem solving, and using general knowledge. Using groups or pairs and peer tutoring. These are multi-level teaching. And when coming to language, remember that for us to be able to identify barriers to learning in languages or in learning language, we have to look at the spoken language, the written language, reading, and comprehension. These are the categories or the components of language. Therefore, we should not only focus on reading and writing. No, let's also focus on spoken languages, written languages, comprehension, and reading. Now let us come let us come to the examination preparation. Students, please know that the institution does not allow us to give guidelines or scope, let me say scope or demarcation of examination, because sometimes it might happen that we give the scope and then you find that the question paper is not according to what you were told, then you will complain. Therefore, we don't give the scope. Rather, we encourage students to learn or to study all the contents. And remember, you don't study only for writing examination to pass the module or to get the qualification, but you have to implement what you have learned to your teaching practice. Therefore, what you are going to focus on in the examination, study every content of this module from study unit 1 up to the last study unit. And what I can emphasize is that we are going to use the analysis, meaning that we're looking at the level, we're looking at the level, and thereafter we set questions according to the NQF level of that. So here we're talking about NQF level 7. So don't expect that we can give the same questions, let's say true, false, so that we can be able to differentiate our questions. Remember, we said we are inclusive education. Therefore, even in our examination, we also focus differentiating our assessment, our activities. Therefore, learn every concept, every content of the module. Don't drill, but learn, study with understanding. And what we should also encourage students, yes, we are going to write a take-home examination, but remember that plagiarism is not acceptable. And when we talk about plagiarism, we are talking about the degree of originality of the work. We know that there are some students who write, maybe they will sit at the same place so that they can write, but you should not write this, you should not submit the same answers, all of you. Everybody should apply his knowledge, his skills, his understanding on the content, so that you know that you are definitely a teacher that will be able to implement what you have learned, to apply what you have learned in practice. And the other thing that we also want to mention or to emphasize, I emphasized on plagiarism. Colleagues, please avoid that. Even if you are in groups, avoid writing the same answers. Apply your knowledge. I still repeat, apply your knowledge, apply the skills, apply knowledge and understanding, so that you know that indeed you understand the content of the module. And the other aspect is that in plagiarism, remember that we are going to use the invigilators tool. Therefore, there will be a proctoring or invigilators tool where you will be using your camera, and that invigilator tool will detect whether it's you who's writing the examination. So we will give you more information about that. Therefore, what I emphasize, or what I encourage, is that when we post announcements, please go through the announcements, go through the documents that will be sharing or that will be posting in the announcement. Go through them so that you understand them. And if you don't understand, send an email or call us so that we can explain that further. We want you to pass the module, not to pass only so that you can complete your qualification, but with understanding, apply the knowledge, skills, and the understanding. That is what I want to emphasize on you. To you. And the other aspect is, okay, I mentioned that we will continuously communicate with you through announcement, posting information on online examination, the use of the invigilators tool, how to access the exam question paper, or how to download the exam question paper, how to upload your exam script, and also how to we are going to explain that. Therefore, they use your My Life email address. Students, we are not communicating with students through the Gmail or the private email addresses, but we communicate with students using the My Life email address. Therefore, make sure that your My Life email address is always active, because that's where you will get the announcements. That's where you will get every detail, every detail or every communication from the institution or from us. And I like to thank you.